Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media.
Today on Spotlight, she's one of the country's premier designers, and now her work's in a new exhibit in Webster Groves. Plus, a book hoping to set the record straight about Ulysses S. Grant and how he fought for civil rights. And then why they call these absolute masterpieces, and the painting being shown for the very first time. But first, inside the pickleball craze, how you play and why so many are obsessed with the sport. It's Sunday, and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
You might say these people are friends of the court, and they're having a ball.
Anybody who comes can play, and we just have a good time.
It's called pickleball, a fast-growing sport a lot of people still know very little about, though these days it's hard to miss. Pickleball is played all over town. These folks meet several days a week at North Point Park in Baldwin.
I'd say the number of players has probably doubled or tripled since the pandemic started.
Pickleball has been around since the 1960s and is a cross between tennis, ping pong, and badminton. Nothing about the game has anything to do with pickles, but the exact origin of its goofy name is in dispute, even amongst members of the families who invented it.
There are two different stories. One is that they used to have a dog by the name of Pickles, and when the ball got away, they'd send the dog and they'd say, "Pickleball," and he'd go get it. The wife of the guy that invented the game said that's not really true, but I like the story.
Part of the draw of pickleball is how quickly you can start playing. It's easy to learn and inexpensive to get started. An entry-level paddle costs less than a single round of golf. And in pickleball, you don't have to be a great athlete to have a great time.
If you watch the people, some of them run, some of them don't. It's not a big deal.
They call me the statue because movement to me is laborious, okay? So I kind of stand still, and if I can't get it, it's a nice shot.
I'm almost 80, and I've got Parkinson's disease. And I play as much as I can. It's just not very fun. But I play.
Whether it's the welcoming atmosphere or ease of play, pickleball's popularity continues to grow. Since 2014, participation in the United States has doubled. And while the sport has a reputation as a game for older people, almost 1/3 of those playing these days are under the age of 25.
I can come here. I don't need to arrange with 3 other people to play anytime. I just come here, show up, I play with here, play as long as I want, and I leave. You know, it's just completely open play. People walk by and they say, "Can you play here?" And we say, "Yeah, we got an extra paddle." We give them a paddle and they play.
4-0.
Pickleball seems by design to be as much a social activity as an athletic one, both on the court, where opposing players stand just 14 feet apart, and on the sidelines, where players waiting to swap in swap stories.
What happened last night? Hey, did you see the Cards last night? Hey, did you see the Blues last night? Oh, you haven't been here for 3 days. What's the problem? Oh, grandkids were in. Where'd you go? It's not just the weather.
We had 2 courts for a long time, so we'd have 8 playing and 12 sitting out. And it was a nice social time. People sat around and talked. Now we repainted this about 3 weeks ago to 4 courts. Now people complain they don't get to sit out and talk enough.
To me, it's changed my life because I did it right before COVID. And during COVID, we played out here all winter. We had gloves and hats and, we'd bring the shovels if we needed to. And it really is a community. It's nice. We really do care about each other.
Betty Vint learned just how deep that feeling goes when in August of 2021, her husband Stephen passed away after a long illness.
Pickleball helped me to relieve my stress while I was going back and forth to the hospital. The day that my husband passed, my pickleball family was right at my door the day that he passed to support me.
Some locations attract more competitive players, but the vast majority of pickleballers are just doing it for the smile. Sure, they often have to spend time explaining pickleball to people who've never heard of it, but the camaraderie they feel, and the sense of community they enjoy make playing pickleball a net gain.
The people are so nice and accepting and encouraging. It's just a great way to spend the morning.
For more St. Louis stories, subscribe to the HEC YouTube channel. Connect STL from HEC Media.
Hi, I'm Mary Engelbright. I'm an artist here in St. Louis, and I'm at my show at Green Door Art Gallery in Webster Groves. As you walk through the show, you're going to see a lot of art that stretches over a lot of years. There are illustrations for calendars, a few book illustrations, and some Mary Engeldark illustrations, so a little bit of everything is in the show. I started showing at Green Door a few years ago, and it has just been a wonderful spot because there's always some of my work here, whether I'm having a show or not. So it's a great place to check it out. There's always something here. And it's a business that reminds me of my business. It's small and it's very friendly, and we feel very comfortable showing here. So I've been doing this about 40 years. I started out freelancing, doing any kind of artwork anybody needed, advertising, that kind of thing. But then I started illustrating greeting cards, and it grew from there. Calendars, children's books, all kinds of different products. I would say that I draw a lot of children, kind of fantasy in the drawings, but it's all based on things that we all go through every day. Close family ties and friendship and funny things that happen. So the things that actually happen in my life, that's what I'm illustrating. And I just live a regular life, so things that are happening to me are happening to everybody. So I think it's recognizable, even though some of it might be a little fantasy looking. It's actually real life. People seem to have a really personal and close relationship to a lot of the drawings. As I say, I've been doing this so long, but they've got cards that they bought at the very beginning where they bought one to send to a friend and one to keep, and they'll bring it to a show or a signing. And because it really meant something to them. And I've had my daughter's friends come over to the house, and they're so surprised to see the night before Christmas, and they say, oh my gosh, we read this every year when I was little. So, you know, and it means a lot to them, and it means a lot to me, that it means a lot to them. I just feel very lucky that I am able to give them that. I put a lot of myself into each drawing. I don't just knock them out for the project. They're all very personal. And I think, you know, I illustrate a lot about friendship and families. So I think people recognize themselves in the drawings. I hope that's why they're drawn to them. And I think that's maybe why it lasted so long. So it's still very personal for me, and I love doing it. It's how I spend every day, and I can't imagine not doing it.
With every stroke of the bow, every stroke of the brush, with every stroke of genius, the arts make life in St. Louis richer, not just emotionally, but also economically. In our region, the arts create $869 million a year in economic activity, supporting 12,000 jobs, generating $155 million for state and local governments, with more than 8 million annual arts-related visits. That's more than all St. Louis sporting events combined. Whether in a park, on a street, or a wall, experimental or a classic, the arts deserve our support, because the arts help support us. HEC Media is proud to be our region's home for arts, education, and culture. Because in St. Louis, the arts mean business.
Rising from the rubble of the Civil War emerged a group in the South whose ultimate goal was a counter-revolution, their reaction to losing to the North. They called themselves the Ku Klux Klan. Led by former white Confederate officers and soldiers, the KKK grew quickly, brutalizing former slaves and sympathetic whites all across the war-torn South. You describe it as the first organized terrorist movement in American history.
The white reactionaries who formed the Ku Klux Klan and attempted to overthrow Reconstruction were proud of being white supremacists. They used the term. And similarly, people who were victims of the Klan or observing the Klan did use the word terror and terrorism.
In his latest book, Klan War, Ulysses S. Grant and the Battle to Save Reconstruction, historian and author Fergus Bordovich sets the record straight about two-term President Grant and his efforts to use the federal government to suppress the Klan.
He was a victim of the lost cause ideology which prevailed for that 100 years. And if you look at Grant through the lens of civil rights, human rights, you see a heroic figure, not a failure.
The author of 8 previous nonfiction books, Bordovich uses vivid accounts in Klan War to tell a compelling narrative that are reminders of today's challenges to protect the ballot box and quell intimidation.
What I've tried to do in this book, and other writers have also been trying to do, is to go back to what Reconstruction really was, what was really at stake.
Well, I'm just wondering, are you aware that just a few miles away is our old courthouse where the Dred Scott case, the original case, was heard before it went to the Supreme Court?
I am indeed aware of it, a place we all ought to know about.
They were, ahead of their time in terms of suing for their freedom, but it didn't really help them. The Supreme Court, one of the worst decisions made was probably that decision to not grant them that.
For sure. Today, nobody would disagree with you.
Right. And then Grant's Farm, that's another one that's become kind of a family attraction where Ulysses S. Grant owned some land that originally was owned by his in-laws, the Dents.
Yes, indeed.
So there's a lot of Missouri in this book. So I learned a lot from the book and this ugly chapter in American history. What was missing from other history books that you felt you needed to write Klan War?
The whole period of Reconstruction from approximately 1865 to 1876 has been wildly misunderstood for almost 100 years, give or take.
What I found interesting is, because again, we have the St. Louis connection here, when he took over the land, because the Dent family, his wife was a Dent, prominent family, they owned this land down, which is now, I guess that's South City, South County, where Grant's Farm is, and there were slave homes, cabins, on the property. He had them taken out. But he owned slaves at one time. So then you see this, and it wasn't like overnight, gee, I had this aha moment, I'm against slavery. You talk about his thinking and his process that changed his mind. That was fascinating.
Sure. I mean, to be fair to Grant, he was never pro-slavery in his entire life.
Right.
His father was an abolitionist.
Right.
Grant was, before the Civil War, an essentially apolitical man. He didn't have much in the way of politics. And he only owned, and very briefly, thanks to the Dents, which embarrassed him no end, only one slave in his own name. He was not happy about it.
What helped shape your desire to write about American history?
My grandmother would try to keep me entertained or engaged in the afternoons. And she would tell me the Civil War stories of her father and her father's friends. And she had all these stories. And from that early, I had this fascination with history, and specifically the Civil War era. And her memory was close enough to it that it was very real to me. I found myself essentially writing history even as a journalist. So it's always been there.
To find out about other historical facts that he says we've been taught incorrectly, watch the full interview at hecmedia.org. The Missouri Waltz was adopted as the official state song of Missouri on June 30th, 1949. Originally published in 1914, the song did not sell well and was considered a failure. Sales increased substantially after Missourian Harry S. Truman became president, and it was reported that the Missouri Waltz was his favorite song, which was later denied by the president. The song has been adapted by notable musicians like Bing Crosby, Perry Como, and Johnny Cash.
We're here in the galleries of the St. Louis Art Museum at the exhibition Concealed Layers: Uncovering Expressionist Paintings. This exhibition was inspired by a brand new catalog of the museum's collection of German Expressionist paintings that I wrote and is based on years of research on these paintings. The exhibition is a celebration of all of the new conservation discoveries we made in the process of researching and writing that book. The St. Louis Art Museum is home to one of the nation's strongest collections of modern and contemporary German art. And this exhibition celebrates one part of that heritage, specifically our German expressionist collection. Now, expressionism is an art movement that appeared in Germany in 1910. It was really the first modern art movement in Germany of the 20th century. The works on view here are some of the absolute masterpieces of that movement. One of the paintings you might recognize from earlier visits to the museum is Ernst Ludwig Kirchner's Circus Rider. For this exhibition, we're showing the painting that's been hiding on its reverse for almost 100 years. This painting, Dancers with Castanets, has always been on the back, but we're showing it for the first time in this exhibition. So one of the most exciting parts of this exhibition is the way that it takes you below the surface of the paintings to these previously hidden layers that reveal so much about the painting, that completely transform how we understand the painting. A good example of that is Carl Schmidt-Rottluff's Rising Moon, which is included in the exhibition.
With a technique called X-ray fluorescence, otherwise known as XRF, we're able to reconstruct how the artist applied the pigments and in their sequence. Because this artist used pure pigments, paints from the tube, we're able to use a special analyzer and detect signature chemical components in each paint that represent those pigments. And we're able to look really closely and reconstruct the layer in which he applied those paints. So it's almost as if we were standing in the studio next to him and we're watching him apply his blues, his greens, his reds, and his oranges in that vibrant moon. In conservation, we are able to employ a whole array of technical analyses to understand these artworks better. One technique is X-radiography, where we get an X-radiograph showing the interior wooden structure or metallic components of the painting. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it will show an entire underpainting lurking beneath the layers. Another fantastic technique that we can utilize is infrared reflectography. In this mode of looking, some of the paints go transparent, where other materials, such as the medium where artists tend to make their design sketches in, remain opaque. So we're absolutely able to see through the painted layers and render visible that underlying sketch. So as we move through the galleries, you'll see lots of examples of the technical analyses. And the technical analysis is answering questions of how these artists constructed these works. This is a reminder of appreciating these artworks as material beings. And with these technical analyses, different modes of looking at using different cameras, sensors, and modes of light, we can unpack those layers and discover how they actually were constructed.
We're so excited to present this exhibition, which shows these familiar paintings in a completely new light. Please come out and see the show. It's on view until August 4th here at the St. Louis Art Museum.
Later on Spotlight, the building in downtown St. Louis that was built on quicksand. History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. The Fagin Building, completed in 1888 in St. Louis, stirred controversy due to its eccentric design, characterized by peculiar features such as pencil-thin granite stacks and a bulbous tower. Public historian Andrew Wonko explains how the building was possibly just ahead of its time.
St. Louis is a city renowned for its architectural splendor, but the city has also witnessed both adoration and disdain for its architectural creations. In 1888, the completion of the Fagin Building on Olive Street sparked controversy, earning it the title of the most discreditable piece of architecture in the United States. Designed by St. Louis architect Charles Clark for his eccentric millionaire father-in-law Aaron Fagin, it reflected Fagin's unconventional tastes. The building boasted peculiar features like pencil-thin stacks of granite boulders, outward jutting columns, and seemingly random bay windows. Topping everything was a bulbous granite tower that looked like it blended elements of ancient temples and rustic log cabins. The Fagin Building's unconventional design created a spectacle that elicited fear and aversion among St. Louisans. Its vertical expanses of glass and imposing peak gave the illusion of it tilting forward, deterring pedestrians from even walking in front of it. The architectural community, including a national critic in the April 1893 Architectural Record, lambasted it as an atrocity and a staggeringly drunk disregard of decency. However, some historians suggest that maybe the Fagin Building was just a little bit too far ahead of its time, anticipating the modernist architectural movement that would soon rise. Just a few decades later, similar elements like vertical glass walls and inventive shapes would become emblematic of modernism, possibly reframing the Fagin Building as a pioneer in architectural experimentation. Unfortunately, we'll never get the chance to find out. After years of financial woes and public disdain, the Fagin Building's unconventional facade was eventually replaced with a conventional brick exterior in 1895. The whole building was ultimately demolished in 1918 to make way for the Arcade Building, a testament to St. Louis's ever-evolving architectural landscape. The story of the Fagin Building serves as a reminder of the dynamic interplay between architectural innovation, public perception, and the passage of time. While it may have been met with scorn in its own day, its legacy offers insights into the evolving tastes and trends that continue to shape our city's architectural heritage.
Next on History Spotlight, how St. Louis played a role in the advancement of wireless communication.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.
HEC Media. Recognized. Celebrated. Honored time and again for excellence in the industry. HEC Media has been bringing home the hardware for over a decade. Arts and education to author talks, magazine shows and documentaries, individual craft achievements to overall excellence. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
You can find the stories featured in today's show along with past episodes and more at hecmedia.org/spotlight.
St. Louis architecture is so much, it is so varied. Well, the arch is super important because it is such a simplistic symbol of the birth of our country, right? And architecturally it's incredible because it was designed about 25 years before people think it was, right? Like it looks like it was built in the 1960s, but it was designed in the 1940s. So it was very forward thinking at the time, which makes it incredibly significant. So much more to St. Louis than the arch. So when looking at St. Louis architecture, it's kind of great to think about the idea that we just kind of pulled our city out of the ground, right? The clay for the brick, the limestone for the foundations, and the people that came here from all over the world to build our city. So this is the Wainwright Building by Louis Sullivan, one of the most important architects in American architectural history, and it's his most important building, and it's considered the first skyscraper. When we talk about the Wainwright Building and we say it's the first skyscraper, usually someone laughs because they're like, there's no way. And yes, it was not the first tall building, and it's not the tallest building of its time even of the 1890s. But what it's different and what makes it the first skyscraper is it's the first building to look tall. It articulates its height, is how we say it. You know, the form that Louis Sullivan came up with could be stretched another 80 stories, right, and be the same form, and that was really radically different. What's also significant about the building is its use of St. Louis materials, right? Red terracotta. They're using the material that you see everywhere in the red bricks, you know, all throughout St. Louis. And so it's really symbolic of that. And even though it has a lot of carvings and some really great detailing on it, it is definitely leaning towards modern, and it has much less detailing than other buildings of its time would have had. So this is the old post office, and it was actually designed in the 1870s, right after the Civil War. The federal government built several of these around the country as a kind of a show of might, right? They put these big federal buildings in lots of big cities like Philadelphia and New York. Of those 6 that they built, only 2, this is the only one that's left. So it's really significant, not just locally, but nationally. The guy that designed it, his name is Alfred Mullett, and he was working for the US government, and he designed these buildings. And there are only 2 examples of his work in this style left. One is the Executive Building in Washington, D.C., and this one. And so it's really, really significant. It's actually listed on one of the top 10 most significant buildings in the country. And they started excavating to put this building on the site. Not too far down, they actually ran into a big area of quicksand. And they had to adjust for that. And so the way they did that is they sunk over 4,000 pine logs into the quicksand to get a firm thing, poured concrete on top of that, and the building has not settled or moved since. So we're at the Soulard Market, one of the most famous places in St. Louis. Everybody hears about it, but it's not a building that a lot of people know about. The actual history of it, how it got to be here, and it's a building with a huge history. This land was donated to the city of St. Louis in the early 1800s by Julia Soulard, who owned this land. She donated it with the caveat that it will always be a public market, which is why St. Louis has a public market still, all these years later. And it's considered one of the oldest farmers markets west of the Mississippi. Well, the original was just a bunch of people with horse carts. And then there were, kind of a more ramshackle type structure. Also, the site that it's on, this was hit by a tornado in 1896. An F4 tornado swept through here, doing massive damage, flattened the market. And the building that we have now was the building that was rebuilt after that tornado. 90% of Soulard is that great St. Louis red brick. And while I'm not quite sure where this brick comes from, it is interesting how it sits within the neighborhood and they used yellow brick. Yellows and browns, so it does kind of set itself apart from the red brick of the neighborhood. So we're over here in kind of a residential area of Soulard. I mean, everybody connects Soulard to the market, but it's actually a great place to see some of the earliest examples of architecture in St. Louis that we still have left behind from those early people that came here. One of the great things about architecture in Soulard and seeing these homes is to think about what happened inside of them. I mean, these things, the buildings behind me predate the Civil War. So to think that, all the changes our country went through, people were inside them talking about those changes, right? They were experiencing life, and all the changes we've seen in the modern era all happened within these walls. So most of the people in Soulard would have lived in multi-family homes like the ones behind me. There would have been several families living in different apartments. They're called flats. Some of them would have been, you would access it from the front, and then the other apartments you would access actually through something called a mouse hole. And this is a mouse hole. And this would have given the inhabitants of the building access to the backyard and to the upper floor apartments. And so I love to encourage people to just walk in the neighborhoods, even if it's not your neighborhood, walk it, look at the buildings, and think about the people that came, the people that built them. We have so many buildings built by hand, and look at the legacy left behind by those artisans. Don't forget to look up in your own city.
Next week, a new book says prisoners get charged to be in jail, then go back if they can't pay the bill. Plus, how the World's Fair in St. Louis showcased wireless communication for the very first time. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.